Materials in Unreal are actually a lot of fun. They're very friendly. It's not anywhere near as intimidating as blueprinting. If you've made materials in Blender or Maya or any other kind of 3D modeling software, it's going to seem very familiar. And even if you haven't, I'm going to walk you through some very simple baby steps. Now, materials can get very complicated, but at their most simple, like a simple procedural brass material like we're going to make right now, it's just a couple of numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the content browser over here, and I've got a folder that I've made called My Materials. And inside here, I just wanted you to see what textures look like. So these are textures. We'll talk about those in a little bit. That's a different approach than what we're going to do right now. Quite often you are using texture maps, either something that you're downloading from the marketplace or from the Quixel Megascans library, but you can also download textures from many websites. There's lots of terrific things. You can also do this from scratch, paint these digitally in Photoshop, or take a photo with your phone and bring that in as a color map. Lots of different ways to get materials into your projects, but we're not going to deal with the texture maps right now. We're just going to create a simple texture like this one, a simple material that's not actually using texture images. We'll get to that in a little bit. We're just going to use numbers for our first material. So to start a material, I'm going to right click on here and I'm just going to select a little material shortcut here at the top. So I'm going to grab that. We'll go ahead and call this brass because we are going to make a brass material. Brass, yes, there we go, brass. And now I'm going to edit this material by double clicking into it. So I'm going to double click on that material, and this is what our material graph looks like. We have a little preview window. It's black right now because there's no texture on there. We've got our little texture node. This is very similar if you've made materials in Blender, for example, and there's that default node that's in there, the BSDF node. That's very similar. A lot of these names are the same. We've got a details panel over here, and we'll see in a little bit here that the details in this panel depend on what you have selected. Even if I deselect right now, nothing changes because there's nothing else in here besides my basic brass node. But once I start adding other ones in here, I will get different sets of questions over here. Now we'll talk about what all these are. This is basically just set up by default to be a surface, meaning it's an opaque texture. It's not, it's like a brick or stone or glass or brass, that kind of thing. Not glass, I shouldn't have said glass in there. But there are blend modes that allow you to have alpha maps. So maybe you want to make a chain link fence, but you're just making part of a single plane transparent to be the gaps in the chain link fence. That's something you could do by changing it from opaque to one of the other options over here. We can change things like two-sided by default as one-sided. So if you have that plane for your chain link fence, well, if you go around the other side of the fence, it's going to be invisible unless you check that box. So we'll get into more of this in a little bit. But let's just jump in and start making our material. So one of the first things about brass or any other kind of metal is that it has a color, right? It's got that kind of yellowy, orangey color. So let's add a 3 vector. So to get that, I'm going to hold down the 3 key on my keyboard. That's the hashtag 3, the number sign 3 above your letters. I'm going to hold that 3 key down and left click onto the graph. And now you can see I have a 3 vector. And it's a 3 vector because we can use the same node for positions, X, Y, and Z, and also colors, so RGB. So if you look over here in the details panel, we've got a red and a green and a blue channel. So it's a 3 vector. We could have a 4 vector, and that would give us an alpha channel. We could have a 2 and a 1. We'll use ones here in a second. So you'll notice how that X corresponds with red, and Y is green, and Z is blue. And that's the same colors that we've been seeing all along over here in our little directional maps. So there's a lot of crossover between 3D space and the colors. But let's actually assign a color. So first of all, let's plug it in. We're going to plug this little node by clicking and dragging into the base color on there. So now it's thought for a second, and nothing changed because it's just still black. But let's click on this little swatch. We'll double click on here and we'll get a nice little color picker. So there's a little problem that people will sometimes have when you're choosing color. I always forget to do this too. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to find a nice little orangey yellow. I like that kind of brassy color. Maybe I'll even make it a little bit more saturated. That looks great. That looks like a good brass color. I'm good, right? I'm going to go ahead and click the OK button and nothing changed. It's still black. What am I doing wrong? Well, look a little closer and you'll see that we've got the the color picker over here, we've got the actual saturation. I might push that up a little bit, but we also have a value slider over here, and it's still set to 0. And if we look at the samples here, the swatch for old and new, nothing has changed because it's still set to totally black. So I just got to push this guy up. I can push it all the way up if I want, or I can have it somewhere in the middle. It doesn't matter. But now I'm getting that. Maybe I'll push the saturation a little higher, get that kind of lemon yellow orangey color in there. Notice that we can get these numbers. If we knew the numbers we wanted, we could just plug them straight in. We wouldn't even need to open up the color picker. So you can copy and paste numbers if you know exactly a color you're looking for. You've also got hue, saturation, and value. You've got hex codes, lots of different ways. Oh, there's an eyedropper. If you want, there's a color on the screen you want to match, just click on the eyedropper tool and click on it anywhere on the screen, even in the interface. You can pull a color out that way. I'm going to go ahead and say OK now. And then you've already seen here that our little sample window has updated to show our color in there. So great. So we've got the basic kind of surface color of brass, but that doesn't look like brass. It looks like yellow paint. So what can we do to make the metal brass look more metallic? Well, obviously there's a metallic input channel over here. And remember that we're using a lot of things on a scale of 0 to 1, 0% and 1 being 100%. So 0.5 would be halfway, 50%, right? In most cases, things that are metallic are either metallic or they're not. It's ceramic, or it's plastic, or it's some other kind of material, or it's metal. So you're very rarely putting in like a 2.5 or something like that in a metallic. What we're going to do is just plug in one number on here, and I can get a 1 vector, or a 1 number, by just holding the 1 key down. Again, that's 1 above your tab key, 1 with the exclamation point. Click on that little 1, and now I have a little value field. So I can type in here, or sometimes it's just easier to come over here and select this field. I'm just going to backspace, and I'm going to hit the 1 in there because I want to make this 100% metal. And all I need to do now is take this little noodle and plug it into the metallic channel there. And it thinks for a second. It's like, oh, okay. Well, that looks like metal now. It doesn't look like paint anymore, but it almost kind of looks like metallic paint, right? It doesn't quite have that reflectiveness that we expect to see with brass. This almost kind of looks like sort of a worn, antique kind of metal, like something that you might dig out of the ground. We want to make it a little bit more shiny. So how do we do that? Well, we've got two different ways we can deal with shiny. There's specular, which is a way to kind of fake highlights, but if we want to make it more actually accurate, PBR, physically based material, we're going to use the roughness channel over here. And remember, roughness is on that same 0 to 100% scale. So it's either 0% rough, which means it's very shiny, or it is 100% rough, which is very matte. We're going to go ahead and copy this one. We could hold the 1 key down and just do it again, right? But I'm going to just show you that you can Control C and click on a different spot and Control V to copy a node. So I just have this one value input over here, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to go and plug this into the roughness channel. And then we're going to get some interesting results over here. Now it looks kind of like velvet or something, because remember, this is 100% rough. So of course it's not going to look shiny because it's 100% rough. So should we set this to 0? Well, no, very rarely are things absolutely 1, except the metal that I just told you about. All these other ones, very rarely are you setting things to 100% black, 100% white, 100% shiny, whatever. So what we can do instead is, I think it's just easier to select over here. I'm going to just hit the backspace, and I'm going to type in 0.01. So 0.01, that's 10%, right? So it's going to be 10% rough, 90% shiny, right? So when I hit enter, we'll see, oh, okay, that looks a little bit more like brass. So now we've got that brassy color coming from our 3 vector going into our base color. We're telling it that it is metal with this 1 value. And now we're saying it's mostly shiny, but not like super unearthly shiny. It's still got a little bit of roughness in it. Now you can add all kinds of other things in here to make this a little bit more complicated material, but I think we're good for now. I'm just going to go ahead and come up to the save and save it. And then I'm going to come back to my first person map, and we have different ways of applying this material on here. So I'm going to select one of the spheres. One of the easiest ways to do it is to simply open up the content browser, and I can simply click and drag onto the object, and look, now I've got my brassy material put onto my scene, and because we're using Lumen, it's automatically reflecting the sky and the environment around it. That's pretty cool. Another way to do that, though, I can come over here to select this sphere, and notice that down over here in the outline or the details for the sphere, there is a materials slot. So I can come over here and just search for it. Oh, it happens to be right up at the top there. So brass, I can search for brass. Or if you've got a whole lot of materials in your scene, you can use that search menu up in here and like type in brass if it's not right here at the top like it was for us. And there's a third way to do that, which is we still have brass selected. It's selected in the content browser, even though we're not clicking and dragging. I can come over to this third sphere, and that's with this little circle with the arrow in it. What it's saying is, if you read that little pop-up, it says use selected asset from content browser, meaning the thing you have selected in the content browser will be put into this spot. So I can just click on that knowing that I have brass selected in the content browser. I don't need to search for it in this little menu. So all three of those are valid ways of applying a material. If you bring in an object that already has a material applied to it, a model that you've downloaded or something that you've made yourself in another software, it's very likely that that material will automatically be applied to it. Sometimes you have to go in and fix things. Sometimes it doesn't import things exactly right, but that's another way. The material just might be on there by default when you bring it in. So those are all different ways that you can create a very simple material and apply it to your scene. And then we'll come back in some later videos and talk about more of the exotic ways that you can make more advanced materials than just something like a single surface like our brass material.